Thank you for that generous intro. Thanks for organizing as well. Also I want to just tell everyone happy solstice. Today is the longest day of the year. As someone who lived in California most of my life, that wasn't an important event. The day didn't change length all that long. Now that I live here in this northern latitude, the day is getting so long and then so short in the winter is quite an event. So I like to celebrate the milestone. I'm going to talk about local first at scale. So this is lessons we learned building Muse. I'm Adam. I consider myself a digital tool maker, and my passion is what I usually call making computers better, which is the idea of computers as devices for productivity, creativity, and things that kind of enable humanity's most noble pursuits, let's say. That's what inspires me when I got started with computers as a kid. That's what it was for. It was for making art and writing and science and so on. And now we have a whole other set of use cases around e-commerce and streaming video, and those are all fine. But I think maybe almost underemphasized in the tech industry these days is how do we continue those, making them productive tools. And I've been involved in founding, a number of companies, but three you might know is Heroku, which is a web app deployment company, now ages ago, Ink and Switch, which is a research lab, and then Muse, which is my current venture. And I'm going to tell you the meat of the talk here is what we learned trying to build Muse as a local first application and roll that out to a lot of users. But first I want to tell you the story of how I got there, just for context. So it was around 2016 that I would say I fell down the CRDT rabbit hole. Part of this actually came from running a cloud infrastructure service at scale in the mid-2000s and experiencing just how, I think we talked here, Jeffrey's talked about and Johannes talked about the complexity of the architecture and why that's a downside from the developer experience standpoint. There's also the operational thing. Once you get big and scaled up, now you're not building an application, you're thinking about servers and databases and load averages and memory and all this sort of thing. And cloud applications where you have this very thin client that people use and the server has to be up every moment or you can't use the application. It actually puts a lot of pressure on the application maintainer to keep those services alive so that people continue to use stuff. So I kind of had this feeling that could be done better. And when I was involved in starting the Ink and Switch Research Lab, and we were doing a deep dive into computer science and human-computer interaction research, and CRDTs were something that had existed in the computer science world for a while, but were very much kind of being proven mathematically rather than that you could see in working software. So our lab was trying to do things to help bring that a little bit more into what does it feel like to use software that has this other model instead of the cloud model, allows you to work with local data in this way, but still be collaborative. And a lot of that kind of rolled up into writing the local first software essay in 2019. So around that same time, another track of research we were doing in the lab, which was Infinite Canvas, kind of the same domain as TLDraw, tools for thought, tablet form factor, and things we felt were ready to go from the research world to the commercial world. So we founded Muse, which was initially a local-only tool for thought on iPad. So when we came to do the 2.0 product, we wanted to add a Mac app and sync between it. Of course, what are we going to do? We're going to try to go to the research world and draw this kind of CRDT technology world of things, local first world of things, and see what's it like in production. So we've seen it in these kind of prototypes or development experiments. We've maybe used it on a short-term basis with a very small number of users, 10 people using it for 3 months or something like that. What would it be like to take it into an application with hundreds of thousands of users? And then our kind of 3.0 product, which is currently in beta, takes the device syncing and adds the full multiplayer, the Figma Google Docs style experience. So this is the context for kind of the learnings we've had here. And by the way, you can jump in with questions as I go if you like. So I'll give you a quick demo here. Now the software is not necessarily made for presentation level, so the contrast here might not be awesome, but this is Muse. So we've got a canvas style interface that you might recognize from something like a Figma, where you can kind of zoom and pan around, you can select things, you can grab elements and move them. But unlike a design tool like a Figma, This is designed for things more like planning or strategy or design sketching or process design, things that are more like thinking stuff you would have done on a whiteboard or a sketchbook or with some post-it notes in the kind of pre-remote work era. Just to give one example of that, we could jump into, for example, the strategy board here. And so here we have this series of nested boards where you basically can, for each one of these, you sort of seamlessly jump in. And here's just sort of a little, again, something you might have done historically on a whiteboard with some post-it notes where you can kind of arrange these elements and put them up here according to, what fits with, schedule and timelines. Another potential example here would be something like meeting notes is kind of an obvious one. Here's someone did some sketching on their iPad. Or a third sort of use case example would be something like there's this kind of stuff about customer feedback, and then here's designing a sort of a feedback survey and kind of figuring out what's the flow of that going to be, where is it going to branch, some alternatives. So like if you're used to like kind of like riffing on ideas in a design tool where you can kind of duplicate things and try it on a different artboard, and you end up kind of like trying some variations side by side. This is a version of that, but again, sort of like more thinking tasks rather than design. So that's kind of the use cases for the product. Two things, but some things I want to draw your attention to in terms of specific to local first, because obviously you could build this as a cloud application, and indeed there are other kind of virtual whiteboard type applications like this. But we wanted to build it with this setup where all the data is local, just like has been described here already. There's a database essentially on my Mac here that has a complete copy of the data. At any time, I can go ahead and just go up here and disconnect from the network. And everything, there's no spinners, there's no nothing. Anything I go to navigate to is going to continue to work because I have that complete copy of the data. Now, one important kind of like UI affordance that I think that most local first applications are going to need to deal with is giving you your sync status. So it's very hard to see here, but right here in the corner we have this subtle little indicator, which is kind of inspired by a hard drive indicator light. And at the moment it's an empty circle because I'm offline, right? So that's the only indicator, and I can fly it open for just a little more detail there. It just says I'm offline, but I have no edits. I haven't done anything. If I start moving stuff around or adding new things like this, then I see I'm offline with local edits, and I can see how much is queued to upload. But I can do that indefinitely. Indeed, I have. You can go on a long plane ride. You can do 8 hours of work. You can just continue to work. And these edits will sort of stack up and up and up until such time as I'm able to reconnect to the network. Indeed, if I do turn my Wi-Fi back on, again, a little hard to see, but you'll notice down here, it will switch to live. Everything syncs back up. Now we're sort of like all set. Then to briefly show the multiplayer part, I'll just join with my iPad here just as a way to kind of, so there you see a little cursor moving around, which is sort of what you'd expect, and you can move things and draw stuff. But importantly, the same thing. I can disconnect the network. You won't see those changes on the other device or the other users, but I reconnect, everything gets merged back together. One other UI affordance I think is worth showing here that it especially comes up with sort of if you're in a low data situation, which I like to travel a lot. You have weird situations where you're on a train and you pull into the train station and you have kind of half network signal for 30 seconds, and it's enough to like pull down some of the metadata but not really download all the binary data. And Muse, as you can kind of see here, our users tend to put in a lot of big PDFs, big screenshots, videos. You can literally have gigabytes of data to download. But for example, on images, we borrow an idea from our friends at Volt. They have a library called blur hash, which means that if I add an image here, I can see that it kind of starts as a blur, and I can see what's sort of waiting to download. That starts to download, but I can actually manipulate it even though it's not downloaded. I can resize it. Picture of my dog. And so that kind of idea of like never interrupt the user, never like give them a spinner, but there are those times you may need to wait because networks are not always available, And so I think one of the fun things about working in this domain is a lot of the UI paradigms or solutions that are commonplace in cloud, we kind of have to just invent them new. And this is these are two small ones, but there's many, many more to come for sure. So that's Muse. So now, the good stuff. What have we actually learned from this? The operations side of things. So this was surprising to me, but also it connects back to the Heroku experience I mentioned before of like being in the critical path of running a system where your users expect it to basically be online all the time or anytime they want to use it. I've been incredibly surprised by how easy it is to operate the sync service. There's a few reasons for this. This is a shot of our graphs, I think, shortly after our 2.0 product launch. And yeah, I think because we already had an existing user base and we essentially rolled this out to, we had a few 100,000 devices connected to this system within a month. And I was really surprised that the backend basically didn't need much scaling. We have one backend engineer. We didn't really need to make any changes. And partially he's a very good engineer and it was really well developed. But I think it's also fundamental to the architecture. This is something all the SaaS businesses I've ever done, it's okay, you launch your product, there's a bunch of people on it, pager's going off, load average, and we really just didn't have any of that. And a big part of that is the server is really dumb. It's just a pipe. So essentially you have your clients that each have their own databases. They're channeling everything through the server. And there's a whole world of peer-to-peer, and we can talk about the research work we've done on that and the challenges we ran into. But ultimately, we don't have a peer-to-peer system. Everything does funnel through the server, but the server, again, is just shuttling bytes from here to here to here across WebSocket connections and is not really doing any of the application logic at all. So I thought that was pretty amazing. Now, the complexity does go somewhere, and in particular goes to the client. And when I've spoken to, we basically have two people on our team, one who owns the backend, one who owns the client side of the persistence. And they basically said that in a backend system, you maybe got 5 points of complexity in each the backend and the front end, or rather the backend and the client. This kind of takes the backend complexity down to a 1 and increases the client complexity to like a 7. So it's still a net win. You actually have less overall. But still, that is a thing to deal with. And almost always when some user writes in, and we certainly had a lot of this in the early days, sync bug, my stuff looks weird, I'm not seeing my stuff, it looks different on 2 devices, 99% of the time, the fix was client side. This is one that comes up a lot whenever the local first concept or anything with CRDTs gets, for example, posted to Hacker News. I think the engineer mind, the systematic thinker that is used to distributed systems or getting locks or the classic, programmer example of you're implementing a bank transfer and you want to take the money from one account, put it to another. And the very first reaction is, this will never work because merge conflicts. I'm here to tell you that this has literally never been a problem for Muse. Here's a shot of one of our team planning sessions here, which we usually do with the kind of Zoom window on the side and the shared canvas here where we're all kind of editing it together. Now, we did cheat a little bit. Part of the reason why I thought Muse would be a great place to test out the local first sync in its early days is that the domain is very naturally unstructured. And so when you have just kind of a bunch of cards and ink and text and stuff around on a canvas, you do have some parenting things in these boards and so on. And you can get weird stuff where people sort of conflict by moving 2 things to the same place. But it's usually kind of obvious. It's like, oh, we accidentally moved 2 things to the same place. Let's move one away. Unlike something that's really structured, like a layout engine, or there's a lot of dependencies between things, it's just very easy, even with a really primitive merge algorithm, to bring those together. Still, it surprised me. I thought, well, we'd have some of this. Yeah, it's literally just never been a problem. So I think there are lots of other domains where that's not going to be true, or it would be, be more challenging in different domains. But what I'm here to say is basically that first reaction of someone exposed to this for the first time, which is merge conflicts or the deal killer. That's not the hard problem in this. and or all the work the computer science people have done over the years to develop these CRDTs have solved so much of that. There are many hard and unsolved problems in this space. I don't think this is one of them personally. Now, a big problem is what I usually call downloading the world. So here, the benefit of the very thin client with kind of a small cache that you have in the, a mobile app with a kind of a backend API or a web app or whatever is, I go to open a page in Notion, even if it's my first time ever opening any page in that workspace, I just download a snapshot of that page, and it happens pretty quickly. There's obviously downsides to that really shallow cache, but that's an upside. At least the naive implementation of a CRDT is essentially an append-only log, and so if I want to get the data, I need to kind of download it all to get up to date. So this manifests itself in two forms. One is what I call the link opening user experience. So if you copy a URL of a board like this is shown here, I paste it into Slack or something like that, someone clicks on it, they haven't had the application open recently, clicking it opens the app, and then it wants to take me to that board, but it sees I don't even have it yet. I need to download everything between my current state and when that board comes. And if your team, or if you're as an individual, or especially in a team workspace, if it hasn't been that active, maybe that's not a ton of stuff to download, but you'd be really surprised. Our team, for example, is very active with it. It can be, in some cases, megabytes or hundreds of megabytes of data. It all needs to be kind of downloaded and updated, can take 5 seconds, 10 seconds longer. So the whole point of local first was to be really fast and responsive, and the data's already there on my machine. This kind of seems to be a counterpoint to that. A more dramatic example from that is the back from vacation problem, which is if you have a really active team in a workspace or whatever your database corpus is, and I open my device when I've been away for a week, I've got gigabytes to download, and it's, my computer sitting, I've just learned I need to let it sit there for a few minutes. It gets really hot, it downloads everything, it sorts it all out, and then I have all the history from the time that I was missing. I think both of these are really solvable. There's various things with snapshotting and history truncation and prioritizing downloading, things that are closer to me or that I'm currently viewing. But it's a good example of we're sort of reinventing the whole world of, persistence and syncing and everything else. And so therefore, we're going to need to add a lot to it to get the experience to be good in all these different cases.
No vacation.
Yeah, that's right. No European companies are allowed to use this software, only American companies. Another thing I'll contrast here is the device sync versus multiplayer. I've kind of hinted at this already, but when we rolled out a device sync, basically was pretty easy, even at a pretty large scale. And the reason for this, I should have made a nice visualization or something, but the reason for this is that essentially every kind of user or device has their own log. And if you have a single user with, say, a Mac and an iPad or two iPads, or you'd be surprised, sometimes people have 3 iPads, it's quite common. And they have these, each one is essentially, you have a single log, the user or the backend tracks that, and each device has a head in that log. So this device, my Mac, I've been working on all day, it's up to date. This iPad over here that I flipped on earlier is, to here, and the iPad that's on the living room table that I haven't turned on in a day or two is way down here. But it's very simple bookkeeping from the server side. As we've gone to multiplayer, we found that it adds certainly a lot of complexity because you're essentially interleaving the logs of lots of different users. I'm in these 2 workspaces, and I have access to this thing over here, and the server needs to kind of dynamically weave those all together, including things like the adding this person now has permission to this area, or removing permission, that sort of thing. And of course, that's not that's all part of the log. That's all part of the same stream of data. And so that can get pretty complicated, and we have hit more back-end scaling issues now that we have multiplayer, and we only have probably less than 1,000 people using multiplayer, whereas again we've had hundreds of thousands on sync. So to me, as a single user multi-device sync solution, this is just so obviously works really well. As a multiplayer, I think we can get there, but there's a lot more work to be done. But I'll also note that I think multiplayer is basically unsolved for cloud models to some extent. If you think I want to add Google Docs or Figma style multiplayer to my app, how do you do that? Okay, there's a lot of off-the-shelf services. Firebase kind of can do it. There's some up-and-comers, LiveBlocks, Replicache, what have you. But yeah, basically there's no easy way to do this. Almost everyone that has a real-time collaborative multiplayer app with, like, you can see cursors and stuff like that just ends up writing it themselves. It's a huge engineering project, so you end up having a substantial portion of your engineering team just devoted to that. So I see that actually as an opportunity for local first. Obviously you can build a multiplayer service or infrastructure that is more cloud model oriented, but considering that it's still an unsolved problem generally, and I think it's something local first is very suited to, yeah, I think it's sort of an opportunity for this scene, let's say. I don't know where I heard this, but it's really, weighing on me now. Yeah, they say it takes 10 years to write a database. That's an arbitrary number, but the point is it's a large number. Databases and data persistence is just really hard, and users care a lot when you lose their data in any small way. Just as an example, and again, that is really what we're doing here, we're writing a database. And we do use SQLite on the back end, but in a way that's just one small piece of it. The whole realm of, again, these write-ahead logs and how they get merged together and the communication with the server and all that sort of thing. It's a whole new world. And just as one small example with kind of querying and indices, we added we had all the sync layer stuff working. It was working great. We went to add a new feature to the app, which is essentially a kind of like linking portals where someone can move through boards in sort of break the spatial hierarchical model. Pretty simple thing. A lot of apps have it. Seemed like it would be straightforward. Instantly, it made the app just incredibly slow. And it turned out we just needed a different kind of index. We needed a kind of graph view index, and there's this whole thing around detecting cycles and et cetera, et cetera. Databases and persistence systems that have been around for a long time, they have lots of different, they've encountered these problems and they have different ways to build indexes. So we just have to invent that. And the same thing goes for tools, debugging, logs, introspection. We're really just like building the whole universe from scratch here, which is not usually what you want to be doing as an app developer. And again, it's the reason why I think it's so important to have a scene or a community of people that are working towards this. It doesn't necessarily mean we all need to be in the same infrastructure or that there can't be competing services or libraries or whatever, but over time, some of these both best practices and tools will start to exist. I think it'll make it easier. The other piece of it is just hiring. We went to, our whole backend system was built by one engineer, one of my co-authors on the local first paper, who also worked on a lot of these prototypes in the research lab. We went to say, like, look, we're scaling up. We need a second person to help with this. And we really had to search hard to find a local first. The job description was titled local first engineer, probably the first time that's ever happened. But yeah, we really had to scour hard. We eventually found someone in the skier scuttlebutt community that had some experience in this. But yeah, they really, unlike bringing in someone who knows SQL or knows GraphQL or knows whatever the thing is, again, you're kind of reinventing the universe from scratch, and that is costly. I guess like the concluding point is like, do I think it's actually worth it? I really believe in this concept, but part of the reason I wanted to bring this into this commercial product is to try to prove its worth kind of in the real world, so to speak. And I think actually the jury is still out for the end user benefits. We somewhat market like it's got local first sync, et cetera. And we have had some good feedback from people about the quality of the sync and the sync status indicator and some of these other things. But yeah, the offline capability, and especially the much more long-term or sort of intangible of data ownership, I hope that would prove itself over time. But in the short term, end users are just thinking about, I've got a problem to solve today. I don't care about your highfalutin values around data ownership, just like, I just need a thing that works. And so to me, we're still waiting to see if the big investment we've made here is something that is, let's say, like a selling point for our application. But the maybe somewhat surprising thing, and I feel like this reflects what we've heard here today so far, which is actually on the app developer side, I came at it from, I want these benefits for end users, and for myself. I want more data ownership. I don't want all my stuff locked up in Google's cloud till the end of time. But actually, I think the app developer side, the developer experience is really good. Things like the example of downloading the app database and being able to introspect things, we have a similar thing to that. The low operational cost, the relative ease of scaling, all of those things make me say, okay, for app developers, this is great. And so if I think about, someone comes to me and says, should I build my app in this way? And there would be a whole lot of, it depends probably in that. But I think the place I'm most excited for local first based on this experience is actually more the developer experience, and especially making it easy to build a multi-device syncing, real-time collaborative application with, one or two people, indie app developers, rather than needing, the venture money so you can hire the big and back-end engineering team of Scala engineers or whatever else, that side of things, either use something off the shelf, open source like AutoMerge or something like that, or if you can build some portion of this, but still, once you've got that infrastructure in place, the sort of app developer experience just gets really easy and simple in terms of debugging and all these other capabilities. So that part of it is, to me, the much more clear, this is a good reason to do this and to keep investing in this. That's all I got. 3 websites if you're interested in learning more about these things, me on Mastodon, and thanks.
Adam, thank you so much for this amazing talk. This reflects so much of what I've been also I've been again a bit behind, but I'm also on a similar journey. I just kept nodding and nodding. I do think I'm probably more of an optimist. So and I if people ask me hey, should I build this in this local first way or not? I'd say if you want to ship tomorrow, probably not yet. But I think if you want to still love building the thing you want to build in 4 years from now, then hell yeah. Since I think I've seen so many products where you've just or so many engineering situations where you've taken shortcut after shortcut after shortcut, and you just even if you've been super passionate about it, at some point you just hate working on it, you move on to the other thing. And I think local first for me can really make working on a product you love, you still love working on it in 10 years from now. And by then, people folks from Muse or others have done some of the gnarly pioneering work. Their Prisma might work on the client, etc. There's going to be so much better to build apps this way. And some of the things that are maybe on the con slide will be very small. It will still be way easier it's already way easier to operate those servers. There will be more best practices, etc. So if you feel a bit of an explorer, please jump on the bandwagon here.
Call to adventure. Explorers wanted.
Exactly. And share your lessons in a few months or. And just it's super fun. That's for me super important. It's super fun, and also what the anecdote Adam has shared with the little blur hash, etc. You're building Muse for a particular situation for particular people, and then you can also optimize for hey, I might use Muse during traveling. I might let's prioritize the metadata syncing first. Let's have a little blur hash, so you can really understand what are the anecdotes in people's lives, and then make a direct impact on improving that, as opposed to just doing what all the other developers doing, trying to do the cloud thing. You can actually what does the user look at on their screen or whatever, and try to have a direct impact on that in a very intuitive way. So I love that so much about local first. Sorry for hogging the mic on this. But yeah, I want to hear other questions.
I have a question. So first off, I think I speak for everyone in the room. I'm very happy to learn that I can stop thinking about merge conflicts. Turns out we don't need them. You can pack it up, guys. I guess my question is just a form of really? Or is this one of those you don't need you haven't felt the need to have a big structural completeness answer to it and are happy with just plugging the holes? Or is it
no, it's literally just doesn't come up.
So no one's ever worked on a board and some colleague or someone has deleted it?
They do, but it's just so obvious. Okay, like, yeah, something like deletion. Yeah, that in that case, maybe you look in the trash or something like that. Parenting tends to be the one place where I'm in a board and then someone decides to reparent. They're like, oh, we need to like restructure this. I'm going to move this around. And then my breadcrumb trail gets weird, and sometimes I get sort of stranded, and we have to handle some edge cases around, like, what if you're in like an orphan board or something like this. Those are just have been so minor. The huge caveat is the domain that we're in. So if I was doing even something like a design tool where you have like an auto layout engine and the hierarchy is important for how the pieces fit together, I think there's all kinds of ways that you can get weird results when they automatically merge together. Text is another huge example. So for our little like text areas and stuff like that, it's just if you click your cursor and type some stuff and then click out, it just sort of sends the whole thing. It doesn't try to merge them. Again, this is an area of active research for the folks who are working on it. If you're working on like a word processor, especially something like a long document, like a book or something like that. But even there, I think a huge part of what makes the merge conflicts way less of a problem than we think it's going to be is really social. It's kind of like, okay, I'm working on this part and you work on that part. You just have this kind of agreement that's implicit. And it's pretty rare that you're sort of like, well, we're both going to work on this document, but we're not going to discuss who's going to do what. And by the way, I'm going to go board a plane for 12 hours and do a huge amount of work. And, so yeah, in the end, again, we're dealing with small work groups. Our biggest team is 9 or 10 people, and we also only have 7 or 8 months of multiplayer data, and longer than that for single user device. So maybe I leaned in on that point a little too. There's all kinds of caveats here, but my point is that I feel like people like really fixate on that as like this is the first problem that's just going to be a total deal breaker for this, and instead it's like, well, it is a problem in there, but it's not even like the highest one on the list. So I just want to like pull the fixation off of that a little bit and get you excited about other problems that exist.
One more shout out that I wanted to make is like check out Muse's podcast called Muse. One of my favorite podcasts. Like this is where you get Adam to talk about way more topics, like go way deeper. I've learned a lot from it, and I can just highly recommend it. You should maybe add it to the slide. Check out the Muse podcast.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, thanks. I was just curious, the piece about from a server-side point of view, it's simpler to run the services, but then you move some of the complexity into the client.
Mm-hmm.
Did you sort of put tooling into the client in order to get things like visibility, instrumentation, to sort of almost replace the type of sort of operational dev tools you'd have on the back end?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's ongoing as well. So I actually, to Johannes's point about like familiarity, when one of you pulled up the kind of overtone debug panel and download the app database, that rung very familiar. Yeah, I think when you move to, I've spent my whole career in like web apps and server-side SaaS, and I'm kind of used to, I'm running the program on my computer that is the servers, and users just kind of connect to me. So I have total control and insight. I can go and tinker with the database and read my logs and stuff. Here it's more, and I don't think a local first app necessarily, obviously we've seen it can run in the browser, but there is this moving of the center of gravity a little bit more to the client side. So for us, especially because we have native apps, that means to debug something, there's sometimes things to look into at the server side, and we obviously have some degree of instrumentation as well, but ultimately it often results in we just have like a debug panel in the settings, and we just have to ask users, can you send us a database export if you're comfortable with that? Can you export your recent logs? Can you replicate the problem and then export just the logs from that? We also do a lot of things about tracing to be able to like send a request ID that kind of gets generated in the client but goes all the way through the back end, and we can kind of like trace it all the way through, especially for like multi-user syncing things. And some of that, these are often things that are known practices in software development, including classic kind of SaaS backend development, but they need to be tweaked or repurposed or rethought, or there's a whole new model. So it's, again, we're cutting our way through the jungle.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much, Adam, for sharing all of this with us. Super
Thank you.
inspiring, and like, yeah, I'm happy to explore myself, and I'm sure like you've inspired a lot of people to join the exploration and then share your stories in the future. So thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.